Hey, don't move. What are you doing in here? Pre-flight inspection. This is my hangar. Your hangar. ID. Now. Major Elias Thorne. I don't care if you're a space cadet. You're trespassing. You're about to be in handcuffs.
On a clear Saturday afternoon in Colorado Springs, a man in a flight suit stood inside a private hangar, running his hands along the fuselage of a vintage Cessna 170 with the kind of focused calm that only comes from thousands of hours in the air. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't hiding. He was doing exactly what he had done dozens of times before, a pre-flight inspection of his own airplane on his own property, wearing his own name on his chest. Every piece of identification a human being could possibly carry was visible, legible, and right in front of anyone willing to look. Officer Ryan Hedges was not willing to look. What Officer Hedges didn't know was that in the next 22 minutes, his routine response to a vague noise complaint would transform into a federal incident, one that would draw the attention of the Pentagon, the Department of Justice, the Secretary of the United States Air Force, and ultimately cost the city of Colorado Springs $6.2 million. What he didn't know, and apparently didn't care to find out, was that the man he was about to slam into the wing of a Cessna was one of the most strategically valuable human assets in the United States military, and what he could not have anticipated, though history gave him every reason to expect it, was that this time, the system that usually protects officers like him was going to step aside and let justice do something it rarely gets to do: finish the job. Major Elias Thorne grew up in Detroit, Michigan, in a neighborhood where the horizon was measured in blocks, not miles. His father worked rotating shifts at an auto parts plant. His mother cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week and still found time to sit at the kitchen table with Elias every evening, drilling multiplication tables and reading comprehension until the boy could outpace every textbook his school provided. They weren't wealthy. They weren't connected. What they had was an understanding, unspoken but absolute, that education was the only door in their zip code that opened from the inside. Elias was 9 years old the first time he saw an airplane fly low over the city, close enough that the windows rattled. He pressed his face against the glass and watched it disappear into the gray Michigan sky, and something locked into place in his mind that never came loose. He began checking out library books on aerodynamics. He built balsa wood models with the kind of patience unusual for a child his age. His science teachers noticed. His mother noticed more. By the time he was 17, Elias Thorne had applied to and been accepted by the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the same city where, nearly 2 decades later, he would be handcuffed on the concrete of a hangar he paid for with his own money. His acceptance wasn't a miracle. It was the product of a 3.97 GPA, a near-perfect SAT score, letters of recommendation from every teacher who had ever watched him absorb information like it was oxygen, and an essay about aerodynamic lift that one Academy admissions officer reportedly described as the clearest explanation of Bernoulli's principle I have read from a 17-year-old. He earned his place, every inch of it. At the Academy, Thorne majored in aerospace engineering. He graduated in the top 4% of his class and moved immediately into pilot training, where his instructors quickly identified something rare, not just technical proficiency, but the particular brand of spatial reasoning and instinctive aircraft awareness that separates a good pilot from an exceptional one. He flew T-38 Talons during his advanced training, earning the call sign Viper after pulling a maneuver during a simulated engagement that his evaluator could not immediately explain using existing training doctrine. He didn't get the call sign because it sounded cool. He earned it because it was accurate. Over the next 14 years, Major Thorne logged more than 3,400 flight hours across multiple airframes. He flew combat support missions overseas. He returned to the United States and became an instructor pilot, eventually being selected for one of the most demanding and prestigious assignments in the modern Air Force, the F-35 Lightning II program. The F-35 is not simply an airplane. It is a $100 million fifth-generation stealth-capable multi-role combat aircraft that represents the leading edge of American air power. The number of pilots qualified to fly it, let alone teach others to fly it, is deliberately small. Thorne was one of them. To hold that position, he maintained a top-secret sensitive compartmented information security clearance, A background investigation so thorough it covers every address he had ever lived at, every person who had known him, every financial transaction of significance, and every foreign contact he had made across his entire adult life. He passed it without incident, multiple times. He was, by every measurable standard, exactly the kind of officer the United States Air Force builds its future around. On the afternoon of September 14th, a neighbor adjacent to Colorado Springs Municipal Airport called the local non-emergency line and reported seeing a black man carrying some kind of toolkit near one of the planes. That was the entirety of the complaint. No report of a break-in, no mention of a fence being cut or a door forced open. A black man, a toolkit, a plane. That was enough. Officer Ryan Hedges was dispatched to investigate. Hedges had been with the Colorado Springs Police Department for 11 years. In that time, he had accumulated 2 formal citations for what Internal Affairs classified as hostile interactions with military personnel. In both prior incidents, Hedges had reportedly told active duty service members that his jurisdiction superseded their federal status and that local law is the only law that matters on my streets. Neither citation resulted in disciplinary action beyond a documented warning. His supervisors had the information. They filed it and moved on. Hedges entered the hangar area through an access gate. The gate required a numeric key code to open. He did not force entry. He was let in by another airport employee who saw his uniform. What Hedges found when he stepped inside was the following: a spotlessly maintained Cessna 170 with current FAA registration numbers clearly visible on its tail, a man in a flight suit with the name Thorne, and the rank insignia of a major stitched directly onto the chest, a military identification card hanging from a lanyard around that man's neck, a portable toolkit belonging to that man, and a lease agreement for that specific hangar posted inside a clear document sleeve mounted next to the entrance, the kind of sleeve specifically designed so that airport staff could verify occupancy without asking. Hedges looked at none of it. Or if he did, he chose to treat it as irrelevant. "You don't belong here," Hedges said. "This is private property." Major Thorne identified himself calmly and clearly. He stated his rank, his name, and his branch of service. He pointed to the ID on his lanyard. He gestured toward the lease document on the wall. He explained that he was the registered owner of the aircraft and the leaseholder of the hangar, and that he was in the middle of a pre-flight inspection because he had a cross-country transport flight scheduled for that evening. A military tasking, not a personal trip. Hedges sneered. The exact words he used were captured on his own body camera, which was active and recording the entire encounter. "I don't care if you're a space cadet," Hedges said. "You're trespassing on private property, and you're going to put your hands where I can see them right now." This is the point where the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution becomes not an abstraction, but a concrete, violated reality. The Fourth Amendment protects American citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. To detain an individual, an officer must possess what the law calls reasonable articulable suspicion, specific documented facts that justify the stop. A phone call describing a black man near a plane does not meet that threshold, particularly when the man in question is standing inside a key-coded, privately leased structure wearing a uniform that identifies him by name, rank, and branch of military service. There was no ambiguity. There was no exigent circumstance. There was no crime in progress. There was only a man in a flight suit being told by another man with a badge that his credentials didn't count. Thorne asked, clearly and without aggression, whether Hedges would like to examine the lease document on the wall. Hedges refused. Thorne asked whether Hedges could contact the airfield manager to verify occupancy. Hedges refused. When Thorne reached toward his lanyard to hand over his military identification for closer inspection, Hedges grabbed his arm, spun him, and shoved him against the wing of the Cessna with sufficient force to cause an audible impact. Thorne's right shoulder absorbed the collision. He was handcuffed immediately after. As this happened, Hedges kicked Thorne's flight helmet, which had been resting on the wing, across the concrete floor of the hangar. A flight helmet is not a casual piece of equipment. It is a certified, calibrated piece of government-issued personal protective gear, cataloged under federal property regulations and assigned to a specific service member. Kicking it across a concrete floor constitutes damage to government property. The helmet sustained a cracked visor mount. It would have to be inspected, certified, and replaced before Thorne could legally fly a military aircraft again. And that assumed Thorne would be able to fly at all, because the shoulder injury he sustained during the arrest would, in the hours that followed, be diagnosed as a torn labrum, a serious structural injury that placed his flight status in immediate jeopardy. Major Elias Thorne, command pilot, F-35 instructor, holder of a top-secret clearance, owner of that airplane, leaseholder of that hangar, man whose name was sewn into his own shirt, was transported to a police precinct and booked for trespassing and resisting a lawful detainment. The military transport flight he had been assigned to that evening departed without him. Now, if you have watched this channel for any amount of time, you know that stories like this one don't reach the public by accident. They reach you because somebody decided the silence was no longer acceptable. Share this video before you keep watching, because the next person this could happen to might not have the resources Major Thorne had. Most don't. The arrest report filed by Hedges listed the justification as matching a suspect description and failure to immediately comply with officer instructions. That report was submitted at 4:47 p.m. By 6:15 p.m., the airfield manager had already called the Colorado Springs Police Department to inform them that the man in custody was the verified leaseholder of Hangar 14C, that his aircraft registration was current and on file, and that there had been no report of any missing or stolen property at the airport. The department took the call. They did not release Major Thorne. At 7:30 p.m., Thorne's commanding officer at Peterson Space Force Base was notified of the arrest. The base provost marshal was contacted. Legal counsel from the Air Force Judge Advocate General's office was dispatched within the hour. By 9:00 p.m., Thorne was released, not because the Colorado Springs Police Department chose to correct their error, but because the JAG office arrived and made clear that they were prepared to escalate immediately. The escalation happened anyway. The Air Force's investigation of the incident began the following Monday. By the end of that week, it had been joined by the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. The legal framework against Hedges was not complicated. Under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, it is a federal crime for a law enforcement officer acting under color of law to willfully deprive any person of their constitutional rights. The body camera footage was unambiguous. The timeline was documented. The lease agreement, the registration, the military ID, the flight suit, all of it had been visible and available at the moment of the arrest. The DOJ's position was straightforward. There was no lawful basis for the stop, the detention, or the force used. The arrest had been conducted not because evidence supported it, but because the officer chose not to look at the evidence in front of him. The civil lawsuit filed on behalf of Major Thorne cited violations of the Fourth Amendment, excessive force, destruction of government property, interference with the performance of federal duties, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The injury to Thorne's shoulder, which ultimately required surgical repair and a 6-month rehabilitation period that kept him temporarily grounded from high-performance flight operations, formed the basis of a damages calculation that accounted not only for medical costs and lost flight pay during recovery, but for the projected long-term risk to his career should the shoulder not return to full operational capacity. An F-35 pilot's body is, in the most clinical legal sense, an asset with a quantifiable value. The city of Colorado Springs settled the lawsuit for $6.2 million. Not a portion of that amount came from Ryan Hedges personally. All of it came from taxpayers. Hedges was terminated from the Colorado Springs Police Department within 60 days of the incident. As part of the federal investigation's findings, he was also flagged under the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act's Emerging Misconduct Registry, effectively barring him from being hired by any future government agency in a law enforcement capacity. His career in policing, and in any government-adjacent field, was finished. The criminal case moved separately and with less speed, but it arrived. Hedges was charged under Colorado state law with official oppression and assault, and under federal law with deprivation of civil rights. At trial, His defense argued that the arrest had been made in good faith based on the original complaint. The prosecution played the body camera footage in its entirety. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Ryan Hedges was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in a federal correctional facility. He reported to custody on a Tuesday morning. The same day, Major Thorne returned to flight status following the clearance of his medical review board. The Thorne incident, as it came to be formally referenced in federal policy discussions, did not end with a settlement and a prison sentence. It ended with law. The Secretary of the Air Force issued a formal letter of concern to the Governor of Colorado, a document that in diplomatic terms is roughly equivalent to a written warning shot, measured in language, unmistakable in meaning. In response, the city of Colorado Springs was temporarily designated off-limits to all military personnel, a designation typically reserved for foreign cities during periods of international tension. Military personnel were prohibited from patronizing city businesses, attending events, or conducting personal activities within the city limits until a series of mandatory reforms had been certified as implemented. The economic impact on a city that exists in significant part because of its proximity to multiple major military installations was immediate and considerable. Those reforms were not suggestions, they were conditions. And out of those conditions came what is now codified as the Military-Civilian Interaction Act, a piece of legislation that changed the operational reality for every law enforcement officer working in proximity to a military installation in the United States. Under the Uniform Shield provision of the Act, it is now a felony, not a misdemeanor, not an internal policy violation, a felony, for a law enforcement officer to ignore or verbally disparage active duty military credentials during an investigatory stop. The moment an individual presents a valid military identification card, the officer is legally required to log that presentation and to verify it through available channels before proceeding with any detention. Failure to do so transforms the stop from a procedural error into a criminal act. Under the Readiness Protection Protocol, any arrest of an active duty service member must be reported to the nearest installation's provost marshal within 30 minutes of the moment of detention. Not after booking, not after processing, within 30 minutes of the handcuffs going on. This requirement exists specifically because of what happened to Major Thorne, because his arrest compromised a military mission, and no mechanism existed at the time to ensure the chain of command was notified before significant operational consequences could occur. And under the mandatory military liaison training requirement, every law enforcement officer employed in a jurisdiction classified as a military town, defined as any city within a specified radius of an active installation, must complete 20 hours of certified training covering military law, rank and insignia recognition, the specific federal rights of active duty service members, and the legal boundaries of local authority when it intersects with federal military operations. Officers who fail to complete this training within the mandated timeframe are ineligible for deployment in those jurisdictions. Major Elias Thorne did not seek fame from any of this. He did not write a book. He did not pursue a media career. When asked by a reporter from a Colorado Springs publication whether he had a message for other service members who might find themselves in similar situations, he gave an answer that was reported as brief, and that anyone who understands military culture would recognize immediately as deliberate. He said that he had done his job for 18 years and that he intended to keep doing it. Then he walked back through the gate of Peterson Space Force Base, and the gate closed behind him. What Officer Hedges believed that Saturday afternoon, that his badge outweighed a name on a flight suit, that a black man near a plane was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be seen, that his authority was absolute and his judgment beyond question, cost the city $6.2 million, cost him 4 years of his freedom, and cost every future officer in his position the ability to pretend they didn't know better. The law now ensures they cannot. Ryan Hedges decided to burn everything down the moment he put his hands on a man who had done nothing wrong, in a hangar that man owned, standing next to a plane that man flew, wearing a uniform that told the entire story to anyone willing to read it. He just refused to read, and the United States government for once made certain that the cost of that refusal was paid in full.